I think it comes down to that dopamine balance that I'm sure Anna Lemke would have told you all about, which is the technologies are simply too stimulating. And so n- natural life can't really compete, I don't think. And I don't really see much of a way out of it other than to simply restrict your use of technology to a sensible level. I mean, everyone uses technology. I'm not anti technology per se, but I don't really see a way out of it other than restricting your use of technology to a sane level and then seeking what I would call maybe more natural adventures, spending time in nature, socializing with people in person, dating in person, not always meeting people online is another good example. Trying to do hands on practical things in the world, starting your own business, things like that. Things which don't rely on artificial technological stimulation purely. That's the best way I've thought of to immerse yourself in life with all its ups and downs. Again, joy isn't just related to stimulation, but it's also related to downs and things being difficult. If you slog through some difficult months or years, but then ultimately make it through, you might find yourself a lot more sensitive to joy because you know how difficult life can be. If instead of like slogging through that difficulty, you kind of avoid it and numb yourself with things like technology, then I think that makes you less sensitive to joy. So that's a few of the ways I think about it.
I'm currently reading Catherine Manix's book, What Matters in the End, about death and palliative care, and it's just taken me apart. In a kind of um, sad but joyful way. These are feelings that we're often living at a distance from.
I think we unconsciously believe in modern society that opposites are very separate from each other, like life is very separate from death,
Hmm.
happiness is very separate from sadness. But I don't think that's true. I think these things are kind of intimately related. An example might be when someone's hand is developing in utero. At first, it's kind of paddle shaped and you don't have fingers. But then a number of cells in that paddle die, and that death gives rise to the fingers that we rely on every day. Similarly, happiness and sadness, if we can allow ourselves to tolerate and deal with sadness, let's say someone dies and we're grieving, if we can deal with that grief, that then opens up the possibility of happiness, reestablishing a connection with someone else. If we don't face that grief, digest it, process it, we end up in this netherworld where we're too afraid to process this negative emotion, which makes us not able to receive any positive emotion. This is something you see a lot in psychotherapy, where clients may have repressed a lot and not dealt with a lot. That's great in the short term to avoid dealing with too much negative emotion. But unfortunately, that also closes the door for more positive aspects of emotional life as well. A lot of clients will come to therapy saying, like, I find it difficult to form a new friendship, for example, because I can't make myself emotionally available. And that would partly because of repression of other things. So I think what we think of as opposites are often very closely connected.
Yeah, there's a lovely quote by physicist Max Planck. He said, I might have the wrong person there, but it's something like the opposite of a profound truth is not a falsehood; it's another profound truth.
Yeah,
Uh,
absolutely.
there's a truth here in that happiness can't be pursued, it must ensue. We are busy pursuing what we think. You think of your Instagrammable life or whatever, and you try and pursue that, and you're almost certainly not going to arrive at it. Try and pursue something that actually feels meaningful and purposeful and will be hard, and you might well get happiness thrown in. But we're tricked into thinking that we can suppress the negative stuff, distract ourselves from it, and follow hedonistic pleasure in the pursuit of a good life.
hmm Yeah, it's a very seductive trick. Looking at people's lives on Instagram and how great they seem, it works so well. We become convinced. I think it's always worth comparing what you see on Instagram with what you see in real life. There might be people you know, and you might see what their Instagram life looks like. I would encourage making an exercise of comparing someone's Instagram life to the real life when you actually see them, socialize with them, and see them up close. And that's not necessarily to say, oh, that person's lying or that person's life is totally different up close to what it appears on Instagram, but it's going to be way more real. You're going to see stuff that's way more beautiful and way more profound if you hang out with people in real life. But you're also going to see the warts and the flaws and the ups and downs, the stuff that would never make it to Instagram. So I really encourage a kind of proactive, direct comparison, what I see with my friends on Instagram versus what I see in real life, because it helps to dispel that illusion, you know?
I remember a number of years ago, I had an idea for Lent. I thought I'm going to take and I don't use social media much at all, really. But back then, I did have an Instagram account that I updated, and I was going to just take a photo of something harmless in my life. It was like a pile of dirty washing and one photo a day. I wanted this to take off and everybody to upload photos of how mundane and sometimes depressing and hard life could be. But it didn't take off, probably because I don't have very many followers and people don't want to look at that. Right? They're not drawn to it. One of the things you mentioned has me right on topic, really. I'm very interested in morality, values, virtues, character. Uh, was the fact that you think this is lacking. And what comes to mind is the extraordinary success of people like Jordan Peterson, who stepped into a vacuum there. And whatever you think of Jordan Peterson, he's interesting for a reason. I wonder if part of that reason is we crave some character development, some sense of substance. What came to mind when you put that into the equation?
I think we come from a past where life was very difficult in ways that it's not difficult now. And that I think forces character building. And then also, we had major religions, and religions provide so much. They provide a sense of meaning, a sense of what's going to happen in life metaphysically, a sense of an afterlife, but also a strong sense of moral guidance. Like, what's the right way for a person to conduct themselves in life when faced with particular choices and dilemmas? How should someone proceed? Obviously, we've become a lot more secular in the modern West. And I say that not as a especially religious person, but increasingly as person who recognizes the value that religion had, and perhaps that we've thrown there is an important baby that's been thrown out with the bathwater. So yeah, you can see examples of substitutions which have come into the culture all the time, which people do gravitate towards. I think people unconsciously, I mean, consciously in the West, we worship freedom. The West is all about, I want to be able to do what I want to do with whomever I want. I want myself to be the sole architect of my identity. And I want to be able to change my identity immediately and quickly whenever I want. That's what we're thinking of consciously in the West. Unconsciously, we really crave boundaries and some guidance and some rules and some structure, organizations and people that come in to fill that void. I think Jordan Peterson is a good example, but anyone in the self help, self development world, I think a lot of it can be really positive. I think it's good to have discussions about morality without necessarily being moralistic, without beating people over the head with it. I think a lot of people, especially younger people, think of morality as very archaic and disconnected from real objective results. So someone might think when they're told dishonesty is bad, they might think they're being told dishonesty is bad. In the abstract,
Hmm.
good people are honest, so just be honest. But it's not like that at all. Morality is really grounded, in my view, to results. I think honesty is actually a better strategy which will get you better results, especially in the medium to long term. If you're a business person, for example, if you're a dishonest business person, you might be able to do really well because of your dishonesty in the short term. Think of someone like Jordan in The Wolf of Wall Street. He was running primarily on dishonesty and had a meteoric rise, but it's totally unsustainable because you're building a house of cards. Whereas more honest businessmen, someone like Warren Buffett comes to mind, they can have a career that lasts not just 5 years, but decades upon decades. Morality isn't this abstract thing we should think about to be better people in the abstract. Making moral decisions gets you better results, better results in the world, in your relationships, in your career. And so I think it's really important for us to be having conversations, and I welcome people going into the public sphere to have them.
Martha Beck has a book called Integrity. Um, and in it, she points out that the word integrity comes from integer, intact. And when we're out of alignment with ourselves, that it can make us ill, like physically unwell.
Yeah.
psychologically unwell. It's not good for us to behave pragmatically but immorally.
In the
And
psychotherapy world, it's called incongruence. In the person centered school of psychotherapy, it's thought you can develop an incongruence, a sense of, so one example might be you kind of live your life for other people.
hmm,
So your parents really want you to be a lawyer. In your heart of hearts, you think perhaps you'd much rather be a doctor, but you become a lawyer because that's what your parents want. In the short term, that works because you get your parents' approval and they'll pay for your school. But in the long term, that incongruence can eat away at you and make life very difficult. You're kind of living a double life. You've got your outer life, which you construct for other people, and you've got your inner life, which you sequester and you don't express.
hmm.
And that sequestering produces a lot of shame, actually. Often that shame can be unconscious and psychologically detrimental. So, absolutely, I think integrity, that sense of I am who I say I am, and I'm going to try and make my life a reflection of my real values, I think is super important.
Yeah, absolutely. Looking for congruence seems to be the work of midlife a lot of the time, right? My experience is getting into your 40s, you begin to do a bit more of the serious inner work. Perhaps I'm late to the party. When you mentioned the lack of religion, that's I think fascinating and probably a whole other conversation. But I think the way we look at tech is in some sense religious, it's deified. We're looking at it to save us. And you think of what will make us happy through convenience or prolonging our life. And it's not like you get rid of religion and you get rid of the religious urge. All the stuff that was embodied
Right.
in religious practice still needs a home. And there are better and worse homes for it.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. The religious whole. So, like, what is that religious whole? It's a craving for a life that has meaning, a life that makes sense in kind of a grand narrative, a sense that one's life is important, a sense that one's actions and choices are important and have consequence. And I think that kind of deification of technology is one of many things which go into that God shaped hole. There's the technological stuff, consumerism, materialism, nihilism,
Hmm.
cynicism, hedonism, all of these things could take over someone's life in the absence of a grander meaning. And I think that's a huge problem. Going back to hunter gatherer ancestors, hunter gatherer tribes were pretty exclusively religious. Now we live in a society that's increasingly secular, but people are religious about all sorts of things. People are religious about stacking wealth. People are religious about their politics. People are religious about their nutrition. And it's quite, people are religious about atheism. It's kind
Hmm.
of funny to see in some sense.
It's interesting. I think we're seeing a resurgence of interest in religion, at least statistically. And who knows if it's just this year or the last few years. I sense that there's a returning to older ways. Interestingly, within Christianity, it's the Catholic and Eastern Orthodox churches that are growing, the ones that are highly ritualistic and structured and mystical, a sense of wonder to them as well. So I wonder that we've kind of explored the second part of your question, but maybe we could bring it into explicit conversations. How do we prepare for an increasingly unpredictable future, given the fact that technology, as you say, has eroded our sense of agency and confidence, made us intolerant of uncertainty, desensitized to joy and experience, and eroded those social skills which are so central to human flourishing? How do we prepare for a future which seems to be getting more technologically advanced, more of the kind of the work of being a human is being given over to large language models and things like that. Maybe you could start with that personally. How do you prepare for it, Alex?
Yeah. So to frame this, my line of thinking is something like in a world with a lot of technology and a lot of unpredictability, there's going to be things you can't control, as we've already discussed, and be a lot of options. Like technology and a technological world actually produces a lot of options. In a world like this, I think something like self development is moving from, I think, in the past, where it was a bit more optional, a bit more of a luxury. Like you could use self development to make the most of your potential. But if you think of living in the 1950s or the 1960s, you had a lot less options of how to live life. And so I think in those times, self development still mattered, but less. If you were around in the UK in the 1950s, had a lot less choices in terms of your career. You had a lot less choices in terms of like how you're going to set up your life. You're probably going to get married. You're probably going to have children. It's a good chance you're going to be religious. Almost anything is on the table. And so I think self development is less a luxury and more kind of mandatory. A lot of my answers are going to be around stuff that's been around in the self development world for a long time. Two caveats. One, there are no guarantees. I really don't know what the future is going to hold. I'm doing my best to give educated guesses as to what I think would be useful. And then the second caveat is I'm not wanting listeners to come away with the idea that I have accomplished all of these things. I am very much a work in progress, like everyone else. But the kinds of things I've been thinking about how to prepare for a future. Firstly, I think certain cognitive skills. I think the ability to delay gratification is super important. The ability to push through discomfort to get a greater reward in the future. That could be in work, it could be in financial investing, it could be in a variety of contexts. But basically, that meta skill of I can be uncomfortable now for a reward later. The second one I would like to mention is focus. This focus obviously relates to delayed gratification, but the ability to focus on something both in the short term enough to get a given task done, but also focus on the medium to long term. I've decided I'm going to start my podcast project. I'm going to give it the focus it deserves. I'm going to make at least my first 6 episodes or 10 episodes before I do anything else. Because without focus and doing something for a reasonably long period of time, you don't really know where you're at. You haven't really built anything. I think developing character and integrity, we've already discussed, is going to be super important. Foundational aspects of character like honesty, reliability, meaning what you say, saying what you mean. I even think trying to build a life that you like, that you actually on some level enjoy or are aligned with, is kind of a moral question. And that may sound odd, but I think it's a moral question because if you really dislike life, you tend to become very resentful towards yourself and the people around you. And that tends to have negative consequences. So that's a little bit of morality and character building. I think taking care of your physical body is going to be super important. In the technological state we're in now, people have to be a lot more proactive to be physically strong because people don't naturally lift things or walk long distances. We get frailer. I think this is only going to continue to be the case. So we have to make proactive efforts to remain physically strong through exercise, nutrition. We have to be very, very proactive about limiting the foods that we eat that we know are basically junk and very proactive about eating foods which we know really nourish us. This wasn't the case for most of human history. The food you were given was food that was healthy. It's not the case now. Increasingly, it's not going to be the case in the future. I think being proactive about developing social skills. For most of human history, you lived in and amongst your family and close friends and associates. That's how we lived forever. Now, socializing has become this kind of add on luxury. Oh, I'm going to make an effort to socialize this week. Why are you going to make an effort to socialize? Because actually, I work from home and I can just get food delivered to me and I can just watch Netflix. I think a person should be really proactive about developing social skills, the art of expressing oneself, the art of understanding where another person is coming from, the art of having fun with someone and just relaxing, which doesn't sound like it should be a set of skills, but it kind of is because it's the skill of letting go and letting yourself relax with another person. The art of persuasion, of developing a vision and getting people on board with that vision for a team or project. I think quite a lot about career and, one concern is AI taking our jobs or making our careers a lot more fragile. In the career sphere, I think a lot about developing cross sections of different skills which are uncommon because that makes you ever more unique in the job market. So, for example, if you are looking at my case as an example, if you're a psychiatrist, you kind of one among, thousands to millions. But if you're a psychiatrist and also a psychotherapist, immediately you're part of a smaller group. You're a psychiatrist, psychotherapist podcast. Now maybe I'm like one of 10 people at a certain level. I really encourage people when they're thinking about their careers to find sets of skills which are really disparate and see if you can combine them. In those combinations, you're immediately going to be much more singular. For career planning, try and get really good at something that humans appreciate from humans as opposed to from something else. I don't think when a company is balancing their books, they particularly care if their accountant is human or not. If an AI can deliver the results, you're going to go with the AI accountant probably. But something like a therapist, there's almost always going to be humans who want a therapist that's also human. Or public speaker, for example. I can't imagine it's going to be particularly enjoyable to watch an AI software speak about life. If you want to hear someone speak about life, you probably want to hear it from a human. Those are a couple of examples. The last bigger category is financial, actually, money, very practical stuff. I think money is super important, probably in a lot of self development circles. We live in a very consumerist society. I think what defines consumerism is not just consuming anything, it's consuming luxuries, like things you don't particularly need
Hmm.
and becoming an ingrained habit, and you feeling like something really important is being taken away if you can't have a particular luxury. So increasingly, I'm thinking about the importance of proactively, again, not because you have some big financial problem now, but proactively relying a lot less on luxuries, saving money, investing money in low risk, diversified assets so that you're much less vulnerable to economic changes, which are just really unpredictable, very difficult to anticipate. I think it's a good rule of thumb that the more cash and assets you have, probably the better. The more reliant you are on modern luxuries and conveniences that you don't, strictly speaking, need, I think you're in a more vulnerable position. So those are the few, things I've been thinking about, and I'm applying most of these to my own life. We can dive deeper into any of them if you like.
Alex, that's so helpful. So you mean eight things, and they're all incredibly rich. The financial one, it just because the last thing you mentioned, and it's slightly different from the others, in as much as it's not that you want more money so you can accrue more stuff, and go on bigger holidays or buy bigger yachts or whatever. It is because there's baseline needs, and without those, you can't essentially you can't flourish. Beyond those baseline needs, wealth doesn't add a great deal to our well-being. You just want to be financially resilient. Is that where
I
you're coming
think it's,
from?
yeah, it's definitely about being financially resilient and realizing that wealth is not sufficient for happiness and can, in some ways, be detrimental to happiness. I do think enough wealth is a prerequisite. If you don't have enough wealth to meet your basic needs and maybe a little bit extra, it's very unlikely that you're going to achieve a reasonable amount of psychological stability. And that's why it's so important. My focus on financials is not about accruing wealth and having a lavish lifestyle. It's about being resilient, particularly when random economic changes, recessions, depressions, changes in the housing market, changes in the job market could occur, and we don't know what's going to happen. I think that's really important.
Yeah, these other points you mentioned are really interesting. They bring to mind a quote that I will butcher from Wendell Berry. He said, "The division in the future will be between those who want to live as creatures and those who want to live as machines," which I love. I think it's prescient as well. Lots of what you're saying are they're kind of humanizing qualities. They're things that often make us feel more alive, being embodied, developing social skills. They're one way you might think of this constellation of things to lean into are what are the more humanizing aspects of life, and how do you lean into them and away from mechanistic simulacrum that is enveloping so much of our lives?
Or at least use the technologies in a way that helps you and maybe elevates you rather than you just purely relying on it
Mm.
unilaterally. So an example might be ChatGPT. What's so revolutionary about ChatGPT? I mean, there's tons of stuff that's revolutionary, but one thing is that for the first time, we have a technology that can think for us. And gosh, isn't that amazing? But gosh, isn't that also terrifying? There's a wonderful article that came out recently in The Guardian called Are We in the Golden Age of Stupidity? And it's primarily about ChatGPT and other technologies allowing people to outsource their thinking and reasoning. Is that going to impact people's intelligence, intellectual functions, ability to reason? My opinion is almost certainly it will, because we know in biology, there's a saying, use it or lose it. Use a muscle or it will atrophy. I doubt that our intellect, cognitive capacities, our reasoning is going to be an exception. So, taking ChatGPT as an example, you can use ChatGPT if you're a writer to elevate your writing, to make it better, and in some sense to make it easier without necessarily wholesale outsourcing your writing to ChatGPT. But you can also just outsource it to ChatGPT and you're no longer a writer at that point. If you were a writer before, your ability to write and think is going to atrophy and stagnate. So that there's definitely a way of using these technologies that's helpful, and it may be mandatory at some point in the sense that a person may not be able to compete in the marketplace if they don't use certain technologies. If you're a podcaster, for example, and you refuse to do remote interviews, it puts you at a real disadvantage because it means you have to only find people who live locally that you can interview in person. Whereas if you're able to do a remote interview like we're doing right now, that opens up a lot of possibilities. I think being very intentional about every technology you use so that you use the technology rather than the other way around is going to be very important.
I'm a big fan of the way the Amish community deals with technology. They have a trial group where they test it out for a number of weeks or months and they think, is this going to be good for us individuals and our collective lives? If so,
Yeah.
bring it in. And obviously, people will vary in terms of what they think is helpful and what they think isn't. But one of the points I think is helpful when thinking about people like the Amish is they do so in community.
Mm.
This list of things that you've given are fantastic, but I would find them hard to operationalize on my own, I think, if I was an isolated individual. So, does anything come to you when you think of what are the ways I can ensure these are embedded in my life? You know, joining communities, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And I think you're right to point that out. I think it's incredibly difficult to pursue a lot of these things by oneself. A lot of people, when they go down a more self development path, find themselves quite alienated from their family and friends. One thing that's on my list in terms of physical health is not drinking alcohol and not using drugs. If the world goes to shit, I don't want to be reliant on drugs and alcohol. I want my brain to be as strong as possible. Alcohol is really bad for our brain. So you might decide, because the next 10 to 30 years might be really unpredictable, I just don't want to drink. So my brain works really well. Doing that can be very alienating to a lot of people who are quite happy with the status quo. And so I think, as much as is possible, I think it's good to surround yourself with people who are like minded. If you're interested in this kind of self development stuff, finding people again, IRL, who are also into it, I think is a really good idea. I think podcasts have really helped because at the very least, you can have a helpful voice in your ear and know there are people who think the same way as you, have faced similar problems and can help you out. But I don't think there's going to be a substitute for having people in your life who share your values, who want to save financially, sustainably for the future, or other people who want to pursue uncomfortable things, want to train themselves physically, who also are interested in learning new skills to safeguard their career prospects. Having people around that have those shared goals and values, there is no substitute for that. I think to the extent that you can do it alone, that's great, but definitely get help, find some sort of community.
It's really helpful. Alex, can I ask if, as you think about this question and an unpredictable future, do you feel optimistic, pessimistic, somewhere in the middle?
It depends on the time of day. I vary a lot. It's easy to feel pessimistic and it's also easy to feel optimistic. That I think is the nature of unpredictability. We don't really know what's going to happen. I think going back to this idea of confidence, what makes me cautiously optimistic is that I am being proactive in a lot of these different areas I've talked about, and that I'm making myself used to encountering difficulty and overcoming it. so that when some big difficulty might happen down the line, and big difficulties have always been a huge part of life, not just because of technology, death, illness, war, what have you. I'm going to feel a little bit more confident that I'm going to be able to handle it. So, again, I guess what I'm trying to say is to anyone listening, don't rely on the news to make you feel optimistic or pessimistic, because some days there's going to be some good stories, many, many days there's going to be terrible stories. Try and see if you can link your feeling of optimism and pessimism to the things you actually do proactively and the things which are in your control, because I think that will ground you better psychologically.
Excellent. Well, it's been super helpful actually for me hearing these things. I take one of the big things you're saying is that we need to take life from the abstract realm of our thoughts into the real world. It's there
Yeah.
in that testing ground that we become better versions of ourselves, the kind of people we need to be in the future for ourselves and those around us.
Honestly, like if you don't want to take any of this detailed advice we've talked about, like just do stuff. Just like find something to do. Again, that's how I built my career. Find something interesting to do and just do it. Even if it's simple, even if plan isn't very good, even if someone might make fun of you, find something to do which you find kind of inherently interesting and make it happen in some concrete way. Maybe that's writing if you've always wanted to write. Maybe that's acting if you've always wanted to act. Maybe that's starting your own business. In the smallest possible way, just bring something into reality, because that is one of the most human attributes. We can imagine something and we can make it real. It takes time. We have to fail a lot, but we can do it. The problem is a lot of people get stuck in imagination and fantasy and they never make that switch to I'm actually going to make something happen. So if there's one piece of advice someone could walk away with, it's just make something happen in a small way, in a humble way, but guided by your interest. If you do that a lot over many years, good things will happen.
Fantastic. I think the implicit message that you've experienced and I've experienced in the podcasting is just being creative. There's
Yeah.
something about the human spirit that is indefatigably creative, but it needs
Mm,
to be given oxygen. It needs to bring things into like, incarnate them, you know? Um,
absolutely.
Alex, for listeners of the Examined Life, where can they go to find out more about your work? You've got a TED Talk, which I thought was excellent. Actually, I do recommend people looking up Alex Curmi's TED Talk. But where else?
Yes, the best place to find me is the Thinking Mind podcast, which you can find on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, anywhere you get your podcasts. And that comes out once a week. And that's where you're going to find anything I'm thinking about, writing about, interviewing expert guests. Once a month on the podcast, we are now looking at films. So I'm calling that Thinking Films. Up until this point, I've analyzed psychologically the movie Her, the Joaquin Phoenix movie from 2013, The Wolf of Wall Street, the Leonardo DiCaprio movie. This month, it's probably going to be The Truman Show or maybe Phantom Thread. I haven't decided yet. So that's something I'm excited about. Also, we're on social media. So it's like Thinking Mind Pod on X and Thinking Mind Podcast on Instagram. And we update there regularly.
Thank you so much. That's really helpful. Alex, thank you so much for your time and your expertise. It's been such a pleasure chatting to you.
Thanks, Kenneth. I appreciate it. Thank you for the invite.